Anita had always been the epitome of grace and strength. In her 50s, she carried the weight of life with poise. After losing her husband at a relatively young age, she had single-handedly raised her only daughter, Ezinne, ensuring she received the best education and upbringing. It was no surprise when Ezinne, bright and beautiful, married a well-established man named Chike. The wedding was grand, and Anita stood by, her heart filled with pride, watching her daughter marry into a life of stability and happiness. But life, as Anita would soon learn, could be cruel and treacherous, veering from its path with the slightest temptation. And it was during umugo, the traditional period when a mother goes to care for her daughter after childbirth, that Anita's life took a dark, irreversible turn. It all began the day Anita arrived at Ezinne's home after the birth of her grandson. She had been eagerly waiting for this moment, to take care of her daughter and her newborn, a duty expected and cherished by mothers. Anita settled in quickly, taking over the responsibilities in the house, cooking, cleaning, and tending to the baby while Ezinne rested and recovered from the strain of childbirth. Chike was an attentive husband, always there for his wife, doting on the baby whenever he could. But with Ezinne often exhausted from sleepless nights and postnatal recovery, the household dynamics shifted. Chike, feeling somewhat neglected by his wife, began spending more time around Anita, appreciating her help, her cooking, and her company. At first, it was innocent enough. Anita enjoyed Chike's conversations, appreciating the compliments he paid her. He would thank her for the meals she prepared, for helping around the house, and for making life easier for his wife and child. Anita, in turn, felt flattered by his attention. She hadn't received such compliments in years, not since her late husband passed away. A spark ignited deep within her, a feeling she had long buried. But what started as casual interaction between them quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance here, a brush of the hand there. And then came the night that would change everything. The house was quiet. Ezinne had gone to bed early, exhausted after a long day of taking care of the baby. Anita was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner when Chike walked in, the sound of his footsteps breaking the silence. She didn't look up, but she felt his presence close by. "You've done so much for us, Mama," Chike said softly, leaning against the counter. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Anita smiled, trying to ignore the flutter of emotions his words stirred in her. "It's nothing, Chike. This is what a mother does for her child." "You're more than just a mother," he said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. "You're beautiful, strong. You remind me so much of Ezinne, but wiser, more experienced." Anita's hand stilled, the dish she was washing slipping from her grasp and landing in the sink with a soft thud. She turned to look at him, her breath catching in her throat. Chike's gaze was intense, filled with something she hadn't seen before. "This is wrong," Anita's mind screamed, but her body betrayed her, her heart racing, her cheeks flushing. She wanted to say something, to tell him to stop, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stood frozen as Chike took a step closer, his hand reaching out to touch her arm gently. "It's okay," he murmured, his eyes searching hers. "You feel it too, don't you?" Anita closed her eyes, trying to summon the strength to pull away, but the temptation was too great, the loneliness she had felt for years too overwhelming. And in that moment of weakness, she let her guard down. Chike kissed her, and Anita didn't resist. The kiss was forbidden, wrong on every level, but the thrill of it consumed her. They both knew the gravity of their actions, but neither could stop. That night, as the house slept, they gave in to their desires, forgetting, if only for a brief time, the betrayal they were committing. The days following that night were filled with guilt and shame. Anita avoided Chike as much as she could, but the tension between them was undeniable. Every time they crossed paths, she felt a mixture of fear and longing. What they had done was wrong, and Anita knew that it had to end. But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. Weeks later, Anita noticed the changes in her body, the nausea, the fatigue, the missed period. At first, she tried to dismiss it as stress, but as the symptoms persisted, a cold realization washed over her. She was pregnant. Anita's world crumbled in that moment. How could this have happened? At her age, she hadn't even considered the possibility, but the truth was staring her in the face. She was carrying her son-in-law's child. A child conceived in betrayal, in a moment of weakness that now threatened to destroy everything. For days, Anita couldn't eat or sleep. She felt sick with guilt, the weight of the secret crushing her. She couldn't tell anyone, least of all Ezinne. How could she face her daughter, knowing she had betrayed her in the worst possible way? Chike, oblivious to the storm raging inside Anita, continued with life as usual, though there was a new distance between him and his mother-in-law. They both knew what they had done could never be spoken of, and so they avoided each other as much as possible, pretending that nothing had changed. But for Anita, everything had changed. Her growing belly was a constant reminder of her sin, and with each passing day, the weight of the secret became heavier. She couldn't keep it hidden forever. Soon, people would notice, and the truth would come out. She knew that when it did, her life, and her daughter's life, would be shattered. As the months went by, Anita's pregnancy became harder to conceal. She wore loose-fitting clothes, avoided social gatherings, and withdrew from her usual routine. Ezinne, preoccupied with her new baby and the challenges of motherhood, didn't notice her mother's growing distance. But Anita knew that it was only a matter of time before the truth could no longer be hidden. Lonely. One evening, while Ezinne was bathing the baby, Anita and Chike found themselves alone in the living room. Anita, unable to bear the burden any longer, turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm pregnant, Chike." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Chike stared at her, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's not possible." "It is," Anita replied, her voice breaking. "And it's yours." Chike sank into the chair, his hands covering his face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the reality of the situation settling in. This was a disaster, a catastrophe that could ruin them both. "What are we going to do?" Chike finally asked, his voice strained with panic. "I don't know," Anita whispered. "I don't know." The weeks that followed were a nightmare for Anita. She lived in constant fear of being discovered, the guilt and shame eating away at her. Every time Ezinne smiled at her, every time she held her grandson, Anita felt the sting of betrayal all over again. She had destroyed the bond between mother and daughter, and for what? A moment of weakness, a fleeting desire that had led to this living nightmare. One evening, when the burden became too much to bear, Anita made a decision. She packed a small bag and wrote a note, leaving it on the kitchen table where Ezinne would find it. In the note, she confessed everything, the affair with Chike, the pregnancy, the guilt that had consumed her. She knew that once Ezinne read it, her life would never be the same. But she couldn't stay any longer, couldn't face the shame of her actions or the child growing inside her. As Anita left the house that night, the weight of her decision bore down on her, but there was a strange sense of relief as well. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. There was no going back. When Ezinne found the note the next morning, her world shattered. The betrayal cut deep, like a knife to the heart. Her mother, the one person she had trusted above all others, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. And Chike, the man she thought she knew, had been complicit in the betrayal. The pain was unbearable, the devastation complete. Ezinne confronted Chike, who broke down in tears, confessing everything. But there was no forgiveness in her heart, no room for excuses. She packed her things, took the baby, and left him. The life they had built together was over, destroyed by lies and infidelity. Months later, in a small, distant town, Anita gave birth to a baby boy. The child, born out of betrayal, was a constant reminder of her sin. She had lost everything, her daughter, her family, her dignity. She lived in isolation, cut off from the world, consumed by regret and sorrow. And though the child was innocent, Anita could never look at him without feeling the weight of her guilt. She had seduced her son-in-law, and betrayed her daughter, and karma is finally catching up with her.